a Fox News alert, Hurricane Nate is strengthening as it heads towards the Gulf Coast. Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama have all declared states of emergency, with landfall expected sometime this evening. Forecasters believe Nate will become a Category 2 before making landfall. Some oil and gas platforms in the Gulf of Mexico have already been evacuated. As you know, Hurricane Nate is now the latest storm that FEMA is responding to, stretching resources and, of course, funds very thin. The House is scheduled to vote next week on nearly $30 billion in disaster funding from the Trump administration, but Texas, Florida, and Puerto Rico say they're going to need much more. Joining me now is FEMA's Deputy Administrator, Dr. Daniel Kaniewski. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. We appreciate it.
Of course.
Okay, so I just want to start right off the bat here. We're talking about resources that are stretched very thin. What do you have prepared for this next storm, especially when you're already in a number of places across the United States?
Yeah, this is our fourth hurricane in 6 weeks, so certainly we're very focused on allocating those resources for all of our disasters. Our current focus right now, today on the 12:30 video teleconference I just got off of with a dozen federal agencies as well as the Gulf Coast Emergency Management agencies, is pre-positioning personnel, equipment, and supplies to the Gulf in anticipation of what is likely to be a Category 2 storm. Of course, we're doing this at the same time as actively providing commodities, personnel, and other support to Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, which is still very much an active disaster.
You talk about commodities, you talk about funds, and you hear so often from people they just simply need money. They need money to rebuild. They need money to get access to food and water. The National Flood Insurance Program already in debt, and we know that the White House asked Congress on Wednesday for an additional $29 billion in hurricane relief. But like I had said in the intro, that just may not be enough. What are you doing? Are you working with the federal government and getting more funds? And how do you become an advocate in times like this?
Sure. Well, we have sufficient funds for our disaster operations right now. If it becomes necessary in the next weeks and months ahead for additional disaster relief funding, then certainly we'll request that from Congress. The current supplemental does have money for, like you said, the National Flood Insurance Program, which is deeply in debt, about $30 billion in debt. The current request would help us recover some of the funding that has been lost as a result of the previous two hurricanes prior to this one.
So often when we talk about these storms, I remember when we talked about the flooding event in Texas, we heard from people who learned from mistakes made and lessons learned in the past from big storms like Katrina. And just this year alone, when we've seen Harvey and Irma and Maria, what have you learned from those storms as you move forward? Certainly, Nate is still going to be a big storm, Category 2, Category 1, maybe not obviously the size of the storms that we've seen, but it's still going to be substantial damage. What have you learned from the storms so far just this year?
Sure. Well, certainly we've learned some of the logistical challenges involved in supporting an island that's been devastated by nearly a Category 5 hurricane. The island had weak infrastructure and was frankly very vulnerable and required the federal government to play a much larger role than we would traditionally play here in the U.S. mainland, where local officials and state officials are able to muster an effective response. So certainly lessons all around, but right now we're really focused on making sure we care for all those disaster survivors in all of the areas that are currently in need of aid.
All right, my last question, you just got off that 12:30 call. What is your message to folks in Louisiana and other parts of the country in that Gulf area that could be really feeling the effects of Nate?
Yeah, well, it's number one is heed the advice of local officials. Those that'll be most vulnerable with Hurricane Nate as a potential Category 2 storm is going to be the coastal area that would be impacted by storm surge. They're expecting up to 9 feet of water inundation in that area. So if you're in an evacuation area, get out. Now is the time to get out. You need to follow the advice of those local officials to tell you what you need to do and where you need to go.
Right. All right, Daniel, thank you so much. Best of luck tonight. And we're thinking of all the folks in the storm's path. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.